people understood the long-term strategies of the Soviet Union - Russia, they'd be a lot more concerned about Russia than they are today. I want to give a couple of examples of the long-term thinking that they do in Moscow. I had a friend in New Zealand who'd been a New Zealand communist, and he had been sent to Moscow in 1983 to train at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning in Moscow. This was a training school. There were 6,000 communists there at any one time. He was there when Reagan invaded Grenada in the Caribbean, and the Soviets went ballistic over that because that was supposed to be the second Cuba. But a couple of things happened there. Now this was 83. This was a couple of years before Gorbachev became a big name and opened up communism and glasnost and perestroika. And they were told, the communists from all over the world were told, that communism always does better in times of détente, where times of friendship with the West, where they can exploit commercial opportunities, they can infiltrate the West, they can make more gains. So they said, we are about to enter the biggest period of détente we have ever seen. We're going to abandon or downgrade the concept of communism. We're going to give up the word, not the concept so much, but the word, and we're going to have a massive opening to the West. Now, they were told that this was supposed to happen under Mr. Andropov, who was the leader of Russia in the Soviet Union in the early 1980s. And he was the head of the KGB, but he was portrayed in the West as this hip, cool, jazz-loving, whiskey-drinking sort of cool guy. And he was going to be the man who led this opening. But he died of kidney disease, so they put in Konstantin Chernenko, the old Stalinist, until they could train up Mr. Gorbachev. And this was what these people were told. This was a training exercise. Gorbachev was picked and groomed for this mass opening to the West. So anybody who thinks that perestroika or glasnost was this big opening by Gorbachev is delusional. It was a planned operation. Now, I would say another thing that happened there. This was the height of the Afghan War. 1983 was when the Soviet Red Army was bogged down in Afghanistan. And there were constant stories on the news about the Soviets being defeated and the Soviets running into trouble. And it was a major PR disaster for the Soviet Union all over the world. Now, the communists from all over the world were, what is happening in Afghanistan? Why is the mighty Red Army bogged down by tribesmen? This is terrible for Soviet prestige. This is embarrassing to the world communist movement. What is happening? And the Soviet instructors would say, calm down, don't worry. This is our plan. This is strategy. America had its Vietnam. America got a bloody nose. It was beaten by pajama-wearing guerrillas, with hardly any weapons. It was embarrassing and it hurt American prestige. We need to make the Americans not fear us. We need to look as stupid and as ineffective as they were in Vietnam. We're going to fight for 8 or 9 years in Afghanistan, and we are going to retreat with our tail between our legs, because then the Americans will no longer fear us. And if you think back to the early 1990s, where only people like Peter Pry were warning about what the Soviets could do or the Russians could do if they rearmed, that they weren't obeying their disarmament treaties, etc., that we took the nuclear weapons off the Ukraine so they couldn't stand up to the Russians. People would say, well, we don't have to worry about the Russians. Why? Who cares about the Russians? They couldn't even beat the tribesmen in Afghanistan. Who cares about the Russians? Well, the joke's on us, because 20 years later, the Russians are outstripping America in armaments. They're at a major strategic advantage in almost every area you can think of. because for 20 years we took the eye off the ball because we thought they couldn't even beat a bunch of tribesmen in Afghanistan. So that's the example. The Soviets played chess, we play checkers. We don't even play checkers. We look at 2-year election cycles, they look at decades, they look at hundreds of years.